Hi there, it's Geoff here. Let's spend a few minutes thinking about the important topic of fuel poverty. Now, fuel poverty happens when a household must spend a significant high proportion of their income to maintain a reasonable temperature in the home, and it's become a super important issue, particularly during the cost of living crisis in recent times. Now, fuel poverty is multi-causal. Fundamentally, of course, it's families living on average or below average disposable incomes, allied to significant rise in the cost of fuel, electricity and gas, for example, and that's despite the intervention of regulators with fuel price caps. But also fuel poverty is a complex result of long-term factors, including the legacy of housing in the UK, which is often older and poorly maintained with low energy efficiency. So this chart is a good way of illustrating what has happened to the cost of energy. This is taking the consumer price index and the energy component. And as you can see, energy prices obviously rose. They rise most years. Fell a little bit in the mid-teens, but then in 2021 into 22 and 23, a huge rise, effectively a more than doubling in the cost of energy on the CPI. This, of course, has prompted a huge increase in living costs. Inflation went up to 11% in October 2022. And fuel poverty has increased. The data I have been able to get suggests that in 2023, about 1 in 7 households in England were classified as fuel poor. I think that's when your fuel bill takes up at least 10% of your disposable income. In Scotland, in 2022, the figure was much higher, around 30%. And the estimates for 2024 suggest that up to 6.5 million households in the UK could be in fuel poverty. The families most affected are those with prepayment meters and also properties rated in lower energy efficiency bands. Oftentimes the energy just seeps out of these houses because of low insulation. There is something called the fuel poverty gap. That's the amount you need to bring a household out of fuel poverty. And in 2023 that was up by 67% to over £400 per household. In other words, effectively, households needed an extra £10 a week, just below, to lift themselves out of fuel poverty. Now, in my view, this is a super important issue to be aware of, and it's a great chance to show both application and also the interrelationships between different parts of your economics course. So I've got a slide here which I've called the externalities of fuel poverty. Fuel poverty affects obviously households themselves, but there are wider economic and social effects. The health impacts, of course, if you're living in poorly insulated, damp housing, you get increased risk of respiratory and cardiovascular disease, not least the mental health challenges due to stress and inadequate living conditions. Fuel poverty forces people to make often distressed choices, sometimes called heat or eat, disproportionately affecting obviously vulnerable populations like low-income families with lots of kids and the elderly. And the NHS and the social care system also bears the brunt. So there's a fiscal policy externality, and estimates suggest that fuel poverty-related health costs in England alone are worth over £1.3 billion. And then there's the general wider consequences. So cold, inadequate housing that hasn't been heated properly can lead to health issues, increased absenteeism, increased economic inactivity, and a fall in workforce productivity. Fuel poverty also leads to increased defaults on energy bills, impacting utility providers' cash flows and requiring them to implement costly debt recovery mechanisms. And then a super important point, looking really long term here, I've called it intergenerational economic impact. Think of that phrase there, intergenerational economic impact. So many children in fuel-poor households often experience much weaker educational outcomes, and that then limits their future earnings potential and helps to perpetuate cycles of poverty. So this is an issue in the UK. It's an issue that needs to be addressed clearly by policy. Lots of things the government can do. The government can work through the welfare system, through different forms of income support, the warm homes discount, the winter fuel payment. Of course, controversially, Labour has restricted eligibility for the winter fuel payment in the current winter, affecting hundreds of thousands of households. And the government did offer quite generous but necessary cost of living payments direct to households during the energy crisis. And then think about government spending. Government's spending to subsidise and promote boiler upgrades, for example, and general home upgrades. I think we'll see more of this, increased funding for retrofitting homes, just with better insulation and modern heating systems. So you can certainly intervene through the welfare system, and there's a role for government spending and subsidy to try to improve the energy efficiency of the housing stock in the UK. And then obviously price controls and regulation. So the price cap is a super important issue. I'm sure you've covered it when it comes to utilities and monopoly. And there's a nice analysis diagram you can use to show a price cap. But essentially, Ofgem brought in a price cap per kilowatt of energy used. So it wasn't a cap on bills, but it was a cap on energy usage, the price per kilowatt. Now, clearly, that's not a cap on total bills. And families with lots of kids, lots of need in terms of energy and gas usage, often found that their bills were going up and up and up, despite the energy price cap. So I'm going to finish off by showing this chart, which looks at October 2024 and just looks at the average energy tariff in Great Britain by supplier. The average is in blue, that's the standard variable tariff. The cheapest tariff is not very different, but that's in black. And then you've got some of the big players there: British Gas, E.ON, EDF, Scottish Power, OVO, Utility Warehouse, Octopus, I'm with Octopus, and Southern Energy, So Energy. And you can see that basically what's happened is that if you introduced a price cap, then utilities price up to the cap. So the idea that there is a lot of money to be saved by shopping around really is for the birds in the UK. The average energy tariffs in Great Britain are pretty much uniform at or around what was the energy price cap in October 2024. And that cap is likely to go up in the early weeks of 2025. So, fuel poverty. This is something that doesn't appear on your specification, but I think it's an important aspect of poverty, not just in the UK, but in other countries as well. An important element of poverty that I think the really well-read student, the knowledgeable student, should bring into discussion, particularly as it has externalities and there's a case for different forms of government intervention to address it. So I hope you found this video useful. If you did, please consider pressing like and subscribe to the channel. We'll be back obviously with our daily video updates on key topics. Thanks for joining in, and see you sometime soon.